Hello and welcome to Who Gets Ahead, the podcast series where we'll talk about what we are doing to increase social economic diversity at senior levels in financial and professional services across the UK and why we need to do it. I'm your host, Michael Barrington Hibbert. We have a vision for equity of progression, where high performance is valued over fit and polish. Over the course of this series, we'll be joined by senior representatives from across financial and professional services who are all involved with the government-commissioned Social Economic Diversity Task Force led by the City of London Corporation. For more information on the task force, please visit www.cityoflondon.gov.uk/whogetsahead, where you can sign up to the newsletter. Today on Who Gets Ahead, we're joined by Tracy Garrad, who is the Task Force member of Workstream 2, developing peer network for financial services employers, and she's also the CEO of AXA Health. A very warm welcome to you, Tracy.
Good morning, Michael. Lovely to be here.
So look, Tracy, we've had the opportunity to speak previously, and really for me, one of the pieces that I was really keen to drill down on today is really understanding a little bit more about your background. You've mentioned you're from Blackpool. Would love to hear a little bit about your upbringing, your role models, because I think that's something which you've spoken about in the past in terms of how important role models are. So please just walk me back in terms of your background in Blackpool, please.
Yes, so as you say, I grew up in Blackpool, my early years, and on a council estate, Grange Park estate, which these days I think has some of the worst kind of drug rates in the country, a lot of social deprivation and poverty, a lot of teenage pregnancy, and not in any way a privileged start. Mm-hmm. And my family, I had a family breakup when I was around 11, which left us as a one-parent family. My mother was an incredibly hard worker, but unfortunately she died when I was 17 and left me looking after my younger siblings. So at that point, I dropped out of education to take on those responsibilities. And not your typical start, I suppose, for a financial services CEO. And that's why I think it's quite important to talk about that and to shatter some myths that there's only one way to get to this kind of role. Because in my case, nothing could be further from the truth.
And thank you for sharing that. And it really does resonate with me in terms of that aspect of your life, and the intersectionalities are clear for many to see. I grew up in a single parent household. I grew up in a council estate. And my first role model, my first CEO was my mum, because my mum had to deal with a distressed balance sheet, but yet she was an inspirational and transformational leader. She kept morale up, and she also spoke to my brother and I in terms of we could achieve anything. So given those intersectionalities, given that start that you had in life, how has your upbringing impacted your career path?
Yeah, well, I think reflecting upon it, and I wouldn't have said or known this at the time, but becoming both parents to 4 younger siblings at 17 was probably my first experience of leadership. I just didn't know it. I had to craft a vision of how our future could be. I had to negotiate for resources. I had to defend the team. I had to problem solve quite a lot. And those are all traits, I think, of great leaders. They're what great leaders naturally do. So I think being dropped in at the deep end in lots of ways, I had to grow a great deal of resilience and grow up really quickly. When it came to going into the workplace, I found myself 2 years on from taking on those responsibilities, frankly, really struggling with it. It was really hard. And the other lesson was that sometimes, however much you might want to do something, you're not the best person for the job and you're not equipped to do it. And that was the situation I found myself in. But that left me needing to support myself. There was no safety net. I had to go out and find a job. And I was just very fortunate that I went to work for somebody who, within 2 or 3 weeks of me joining her team, and it was quite a basic customer service job, just kind of took me to one side and said, "What the heck are you doing here? I don't understand why you wouldn't be in university." And so I kind of unburdened myself and explained how I'd gotten to be in this job, in her team and in front of her. And she was just very supportive immediately to say, "Well, we can help you, I can help you, I want to help you." And so I had somebody who took a practical interest, gave me moral support, actually negotiated for the firm, the quite small firm at the time, to help me get back into education part-time. And I went and did some business studies qualifications. So I suppose my first kind of call out to leaders in professional and financial services is see the spark in people, be prepared to act, intervene, take a bet on somebody, and who knows what might be the outcome.
When did you start to feel comfortable really speaking about your background? Because we've spoken about imposter syndrome, we've read it in various leadership articles. When did you start to feel comfortable actually talking about, I'm from Blackpool, this is my background, this is me taking ownership of it? When did you find that voice?
So I'm 51 now, and I probably only felt really comfortable to do that 10 years ago. So for all the years before that, I wouldn't say I hid it. I didn't deliberately hide, that background. But it wasn't something I volunteered openly. If somebody asked me, I told them. But most people never asked, and so I never did. And there were a number of years, early in my career, where I was interfacing with groups of people generally that did have those shared experiences of, having gone through university, maybe having done gap years and those sorts of things. And I couldn't relate to any of that. And so I often found myself on the periphery of those conversations. And nobody ever wanted why. Nobody ever asked me, why are you not joining in that conversation? I'm quite a sociable kind of person, and I'll engage in things, but interestingly, nobody ever asked me. And then 10 years ago or so, I had the massive opportunity to get involved in the Prince's Trust.
Yes.
And I was asked by somebody who did know a bit about my background to do that. And it was actually through one of those interactions, and I told somebody a bit more about my background, and they said, you really need to talk about this, will you? And I said, I don't want people's pity that I didn't have the best start. And they said, no, we don't think that you'll get pity. We think actually it could be really inspiring to people who find themselves in adverse circumstances at that kind of age, and just showing what's possible could be a real inspiration. And so it took quite a lot. I plucked up the courage and I did it, and I haven't stopped since.
And that's a great segue in talking about your involvement in the Social Economic Diversity Task Force. Tell me about who reached out to you, and I've got no doubt the reasons why you wanted to get involved, but please talk me through some of those reasons as to why you were so keen to get involved in addressing this important narrative.
Yes, so I became executive sponsor for diversity and inclusion for AXA in the UK, and we employ almost 10,000 people in the UK. And I became executive sponsor in about April 2020. And I, at that time, started to do a lot of research to make connections that I thought could really help us clearly define a D&I strategy and then, take action and get momentum. And through a series of people, so my initial contact was a former chair at KPMG who connected me actually with Nick Miller at the Bridge Group, and Bridge had just published their Who Gets Ahead research, and so I had a very open conversation, and Nick was brilliant at sharing a lot of insight that could really help me. And then at the end of it, he just said, look, I'd love to put you in touch with someone at the City of London. There is this task force that is going to be kicked off, and I know that they're going to be looking for people to join. Would you have a conversation with them? And so I did. And the moment that I looked at what the task force was aiming to achieve, I just knew that it was something that I could contribute to, and that I wanted to be part of. And back to that point about giving back and using the position that you have, I just thought, what better way than to do that? And frankly, I was blown away by the perverse inversion of the data. So that data point around, less than 10% of the UK adult population have been to independent school or sit in that higher socioeconomic group, but actually in professional and financial services, in the senior leadership cadre, it's 90% that have been through that background. And for me, that was just perverse, and so out of kilter with the same comparison data across the rest of the economy. And I thought, well, I am in that very small minority. I have to use that position.
And what's important for our listeners to understand, the advisory board is a blend of backgrounds. So we have Tracy, we have a number of other who come from a similar background, but also we have those who are from a professional background, but recognise the importance. If the United Kingdom is going to remain a competitive force in the global economy, it needs to be diverse, not just from a social economic background, but gender and also ethnicity. So this is a massive trend which is taking place. Now, you've mentioned 10,000 employees at AXA, and I've done some homework, would you believe? AXA have worked incredibly hard to support social economic diversity internally. So that's including through collecting workforce data. So can you tell us about this data collection journey and why you've taken it?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that I realised when I took on this responsibility kind of 18 months ago was we had very little data on the makeup and the configuration of our workforce. So, gender is the easiest metric to measure, and we were able to compare ourselves against the benchmarks. We're part of the Women in Finance Charter, lots of other measures, but it just was so obvious to me at the outset that you've got to know your baseline. You've got to know what's the makeup of your workforce now. How does that compare to national norms? And of course, there are an awful lot of difficulties with data collection. It's very personal data, and there's a huge amount of I think mistrust out there about what organizations will do with personal data. So taking the best advice from people like the Social Mobility Foundation, from people like bridge partnership, to really understand how to create the psychological safety, how to motivate and inspire people to make the effort to share their data, how to be able to utilize it without putting people's trust on the line. And so we, over a period of months, had our systems modified so that we could actually record the data, that it was, you know, in a very secure environment, separate from the rest of our HR data, and then embarked upon the development of a comms campaign, an engagement campaign. And we started recording our data in March this year. As I sit here today, we have almost 50% of our workforce have given us that data. And we're getting to the point where we've got enough of a, you know, data set that we can start to slice and dice it, and we can understand, you know, what is the ethnicity of our workforce today. What is the socioeconomic background at the different layers of our organisation? You know, do we have an access problem or do we have a progression problem? And that data is so important to then create the targeted action plans that will make the difference. You can't go off scattergun with a whole load of actions. You've got to know what your problems are in order to define the solutions.
And that's so beautifully articulated, because my next point was going to be, what advice would you give to other CEOs? But based on what you've just done, with the data, you're able to make better and more informed decisions. And certainly from a social economic one, which is a new phenomena in many respects, because as an external headhunter, it's very difficult to calibrate. You have to make assumptions by looking through people's CVs where they live. You have to make assumptions. So again, the fact that you've been able to collate this data and to have 50% in just under a year or half a year is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think we're very proud of, you know, what we've managed to do so far. We have an aspiration to get to 60%. 60% would be, we think, a statistically reliable percentage of our workforce. But, you know, the data is already good enough that we're forming some insights, and we've done a huge amount this year to adjust our employee attraction and our employee brand and how we represent ourselves in the market. We've made huge adjustments to our recruitment processes to be much more inclusive, whether that's, you know, neurodiversity or just the, you know, the different images that you will see on our website as you go through the recruitment journey. So it's a really multi-dimensional action plan, but it's informed by the data. And you know, we only clearly have the baseline as of today, but it's an excellent starting point then to know if this is the diversity of our candidate pool in 2021. In a year's time, have all the actions we've taken made that a more diverse candidate pool, or not? And, you know, were they the right actions or not? The great thing is there are fabulous resources out there to help. So the smallest organisation can benefit from the experience of much bigger organisations. And of course, that's what the work stream that I am assigned to within the task force is doing, looking at the ways in which a membership body could support businesses in professional and financial services, to give them the tool sets, to give them the toolkits, to have a mentoring space where smaller companies can learn from those companies that have managed to do it and to make a difference.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Who Gets Ahead, and a special thank you to Tracy Gerard for being with us today. Join us next time, where Task Force member Yasmin Chanwala and Chris Cummins will discuss leadership outside of London and the progression of opportunities in regional UK. For more information on the Social Economic Diversity Task Force, please type the City of London Who Gets Ahead into your search bar to find out our webpage and sign up to our newsletter to stay up to date. On social media, please visit City of London Corporation on LinkedIn. On Twitter, it's City of London. And on YouTube, The Global City. Who Gets Ahead is produced by trading and education firm OSTC. A special thank you for your kind support on this series. Find out more at OSTC on Twitter and OSTC Limited on LinkedIn.